guys, welcome to Design Technology TV. Today we're carrying on with the videos for the NEA OCR. Today we're looking at 1.2, which is the brief and user. Normally this is referred to as the brief, but the user forms such an important part of this component and is a vital slide that you all need to do that I've included it within it. Omitting it will cut down on your marks significantly, so it's worth doing from the outset. In Strand 1.2, what we're looking at here is we're looking at you writing a brief. The brief is much like other briefs that you've written in the past, but it needs to clearly outline what it is that you intend to do. What you're doing is you're setting yourself goals, you're clarifying where you intend the project to go within context. You're then looking at the 5 W's, the who, what, where, when, and why. These should all be linked closely to the proof that you've gathered together in the feasibility, so you're justifying why you're going about the project in the way you are. Fundamentally, this is not set in stone. So whilst you are saying that you're going to resolve a problem, you're going to do certain actions or go down certain routes to try and solve aspects, and you may even have some suggestions of solutions within the brief of how you're going to move forwards and where you intend to go. It doesn't mean that you have to go down that route at the end of the project. Routinely, what students find is as they move through the project, that aspects they've created change where they're actually going and where the final destination is. You will not be marked down if the final product actually ends up being quite significantly different to the brief. That's not an issue, as long as you've shown the journey you've gone through and you've justified why you've changed the things that you've changed as you've gone along. As part of the brief, you should also have a set of key requirements. Now, fundamentally, 4 key requirements is a very good place to be. What that does is it gives you a range of things that you've identified are the most fundamental to making your product successful. You may find that you have 4 key requirements and then you have a list of other requirements as well, possibly as many as 10 or more, which are less significant but are good to have in place. Again, these requirements can change as you go forwards. So if you find that something you say at the start of the project that it's going to do X, and as you move through the project you realize that either fundamentally that can't be done, or that the user has decided that actually there's no need for it, there's no place with it in the project, that can be changed. But as I say, what you do is you justify why you've made those changes as you move forwards. That's absolutely fine, there's no issues with that. So whilst the brief is a statement of intent, it might be a it might have possible solutions. Equally, it might be a more overview, this is the problem I'm solving and this is how I intend to do it. These things are then not there as cast iron components which you have to stick to. They can be changed, and many of you will find that significantly you move away from certain aspects. That's totally normal. Don't worry about that as you go forwards. But at this stage, some clear intent will help guide you and make sure that you are able to make good progress at the start of the project. Finally, there's the user. As I've already mentioned, you have to have a slide on the user. What we want to know who they are, what they do, how they're relevant to your project, a short bio of who they are and what sort of relationship they are to you. You know, are they family friend? Are they a family member? Are they somebody you know who will routinely uses projects or products of the nature you're undertaking? Show that they're relevant. Ideally, they should know something to what's going on. So if you're designing a product for someone that is a medical aid for them to recover from a sprain or sporting injury, you'd want to choose someone that either ideally has suffered from sprains and sporting injuries, or someone who at least plays sport. Having someone who has no relevance to either sport and has never injured themselves doesn't make them a particularly good user, and then makes them fairly irrelevant for your project, because the things they're going to say are not necessarily going to be massively useful. A user can be anyone. As we've talked about before, the user doesn't necessarily have to have direct experience of stuff, but it's more useful if they do. Something you've got to bear in mind though with your user is whoever they are, you've got to watch out for their bias. So if you've picked a family member, for instance, they are less likely in some cases to be robust in terms of their feedback to you. We have had scenarios in the past where a close family member has then routinely gone through and said, "Oh, it's great, it's brilliant, I really like it, well done, I love it, I think it's fab," but they're actually not being very useful. They're not being the critical user that they need to be. You want someone that picks the idea apart, that looks at the product in some detail fairly regularly, and then says, "Oh, I don't like that," or "That wouldn't work for me," or "That could be better by X." So think about who your user is and pick them accordingly. Within the Markbound, we are looking for some key aspects of the statements. We're going to look at Markbound 4 here. Clear and full relevance of context. So we're considering where the project is used, the environment of use, what is the context of the project, who's using it, where are they using it, why are they using it. You want to offer a scope for challenge. So you want to show that you don't have all the answers and that the product or project that you're undertaking has challenge to it. It shouldn't be that there's a really easy solution or there's already products on the market that fundamentally do what you are planning on doing and all you're going to do is copy them. So there needs to be challenge. We also need focused identification of the primary user, i.e. we want their name in this. We want a photograph of them. We want to know who they are, why they're relevant. We need to know why they're relevant to your project. An interview with your primary user is by far the best way you can do this. That could be a video, or it could be a series of quotes from them as you had a conversation about a series of options and project ideas. You will also possibly speak to other stakeholders as well. Who are they? Why are they relevant to your project, etc., etc. So that's what you should all be aiming for. And the way to do that is by making sure that you've got your brief with the key requirements that you want to undertake and a second slide with primary user. You may find that your brief, although it's called a brief, actually goes over several pages, and that's not necessarily a problem. The first draft you do probably won't, and then you'll flesh it out and you'll add to it as you go along. So as you work through the NEA, and it's something that's important to realize, and it's something I actively encourage my students to do, is to submit your work, get feedback. When you've got that feedback, you can then act on it and make changes to your project accordingly. And that process of submitting and resubmission goes on throughout the entire process of the NEA. We're not expecting you to get stuff right first time. If you did, why would you be at college? So from that point of view, make sure that you're handing stuff in, acting on the feedback, rinse, repeat. When you do resubmit work, make sure it has meaningful changes, otherwise there's no point in your teacher marking it. Within the section, likely content. A statement of what the problems are that you're looking to solve. You'll have already looked at those in the feasibility, so there'll be a little bit of overlap there where you're actually saying these are the specific problems that I'm looking to resolve. These are the improvements, so the aims of a project that I'm hoping to make, or this is the solutions to the issues that I am hoping to follow. Names of the primary user, as I've talked about. Other stakeholders can be useful too. So specialist stakeholders who know stuff about your project are very, very useful. So for instance, you might have a user who uses the product on a daily basis or something similar. They're great in that respect, because they can then give you feedback. You will then also potentially have somebody who maybe is in industry and manufactures similar products or products of that sort of nature. They can then give you more technical advice about processes, materials, manufacturing methods that your primary user won't know. So having specialist stakeholders, if you can get them, is a real boon and can really help you to make quick progress. Those stakeholders, there can be as many as you want. So we've had students in the past who had a primary user and they've had up to 3 or 4 primary stakeholders, and then they've also engaged other people as well. It makes an incredibly strong project. It evidences a wide breadth of feedback, which is required later on in the project in terms of where it's marked. So from that point of view, you're really making sure that you fit in with the ethos of the NEA by getting the feedback, and it makes your project much, much stronger. So if you can find those people, that's great, so do it. Sometimes those people are not easy to find, so you might have to go outside of your comfort zone and email people and call people and do some research, etc., etc. Now is the time to do so. We're also going to show that there's challenges, so actually state what the challenges are. If there's problems or things that you don't know, or there's aspects that you think are going to be quite difficult to overcome because of the technicality of what you're doing or the skill sets that you're going to be putting in place, feel free to show that they are there. Remember, what the moderator will be looking for is, and the marker, was evidence that this is actually taking place and that you've identified those aspects. It will be a much stronger project if you identify them than if you assume that the marker or the moderator know what they are, because the moderator simply won't see it, and that might bring your mark down later on. You're also a list of areas and key issues that you expect to need attention. So that fits in with what you're aiming to do. Within it, photographs, audio, video, diagrams, etc., are all suitable in doing to explain what you're going to have. Common mistakes. Often we see projects that don't have a specific user. So we get a statement of the sort of generic type of user that might use it. It can be as wishy-washy as, I'm designing a building, this person will be someone that lives in the building. Really, that doesn't cover what you need to do. So we need to have more in-depth analysis and more information about who they are here. We also need them to show quite clearly what it is that they need. We've then got the other option is then generic responses, which are just basic and they don't have any real identification of what the challenge is that's going through. Remember that what you're doing is you're putting in aspects that are not set in stone, but will help us to understand where we're moving forwards. We've then, if we're looking at the high marks, as normal, I'm not going to read through this, but you can identify aspects within it. So the high marks, clearly clarity is an issue, so making sure that we understand precisely what it is that we need to do. So think about how you're laying this out, how you're identifying what's going on. Show that there is significant challenge in terms of the context and what you're trying to do, not that it's just an easy fix, easy solution, low-level project. Think about, as you're going through this, what the key priorities are, and if you've done your feasibility analysis well, this should be fairly easy to state and then to justify. We then got the contact with our user and our stakeholders, so make sure that again is evident. A single slide, maybe 2 slides, depending on how in depth you're going, is absolutely appropriate. And finally, you're linking into the marketing and the marketability of your product. Where is it going to be sold? Who's going to buy it? That varies depending on your project, and it's a conversation you may need to have with your teacher. Sometimes it's not entirely obvious where that's going, particularly if it's a product that's a one-off product that's resolving the solution of bridging a gap, for instance, and it's a bridge and it's only supposed to be used in a single environment. How you make that marketable could be a bit more of a challenge and something that you would want to discuss. Here we've got a couple of different examples. This is the first one. You can see on the left-hand side says design brief, and it makes 4 clear statements. The one thing I would say about this is that there isn't an overview of what's actually happening on this particular slide. This student used the chronology of his project very well, and it actually happened in a slide prior to this. However, I would be more convinced and happier, particularly for students, if they pull all those aspects together into a single slide, because it makes it easier to not only mark but also to identify that that content has actually been covered. You'll see it's got 4 very clear statements of what the recumbent trike needs to do. We've also on the right hand side then got some information about the user of the product. So this gentleman was identified and spoken to in the project, including some details of his contact details. It's okay. It could be more in depth, and even better than that, it could have a good amount of input from that person about the quality of the project and what they intended, what they thought of the ideas moving forwards. So some sort of interview here would make this a stronger slide. The student then moves on to a second slide, and he's putting in further detail. It doesn't hurt. You're making more points, you're determining specifically what it is. So apart from the 4 key requirements, you're making a series of other statements of ways that you might move forward, you might resolve aspects, you might solve the problems. This is pretty good to see, and there's quite a lot of detail within this. Something that I instantly identify as a moderator is the fact that it doesn't cover the marketing. So we should really have something where there's marketing coming in here. You'll notice as well that the sources have got URL links. That's really useful and shows that where you're getting your information from, but also it shows academic honesty, which is really important. One of the issues with particularly strong NEA projects are that students will routinely produce work that is really high quality. Then trying to identify whether it's the student's work or whether it's work that's come from another source can be quite difficult, particularly if they're taking really high quality photographs on a good quality camera phone or something like that. Sometimes that then becomes a bit blurred and it's a bit difficult to identify whether it's the students or it's somewhere else. So if you've got good academic honesty as you go through, you're able to identify your own images and other people's images, etc., etc. It's a very good way of working forwards. We'll then look at one that's not quite so good. So it does make a clear statement of what's going on and what he intends to do. Some bits are very precise. So we're looking at the size of what a standard chair is and etc. Et this is a lift assist to get people in and out of chairs. This is arguably too precise in some aspects. It probably doesn't need to be. The other aspect we've got here is we've got quite a limited amount of information about the primary user and the primary stakeholders. Interestingly, here it talks about the user representative of this project is Dorothy Stainings, which is obviously a lady, and then in the picture there is a gentleman. So think about what you're doing and how you're showing that you've spoken to the right people. There's some real issues here in terms of where this information is coming from and whether Dorothy Stainings has ever actually interacted with this project and whether she's given any information at all. We've also then got some fairly generic stakeholder information, including a photograph that we don't know whether it was taken by the student, we don't know where it is, don't really know what it is. So think about the information you're putting over and make sure that the context, the clarity, the marketing, and your key requirements are clearly laid out. Subtitles, subheadings, separate boxes can really help to navigate through the page and make sure that your evidence is marked correctly and is not missed. So one of the issues that students routinely have is poor layout, small text, lack of head subtitles can cause it to be very easy to miss marks, which obviously is not what you want. You want all the marks to be rewarded. So at this stage, for St Brendan students, you may also want to have a look at what makes a good stakeholder for you. If you do so, go to the NEA major project on Moodle and have a look in there. There's other resources in there too. After this video, we're going to now look at 1.3, 1.4, and 1.5, which is investigations and information. So it's the research component for your project, and we'll talk about how that's an ongoing process as you go through the next 10 months or so. Thank you very much for watching DTTV. Like and subscribe.